All right, I would like to go ahead and call to order the March 2nd, 2022 Gig Harbor Parks Commission meeting. I'm Ben Coronado, Parks Commission Chair, and Luis Tiemann, Vice Chair.
Here.
Stephanie Lyle.
Here.
Georgina Armstrong.
Here.
And then from the Arts Commission, we have Lynn Stevenson.
Here.
And then from the city, we have Parks Manager Matthew Keogh.
Present.
And Public Works Assistant Terry Garrison.
Here.
And then we have some guests today as well. We have Councilwoman Robin Denson representing the Gig Harbor Conservation Land Fund as well. And then I think we'll have some people joining us later to provide public comment. Turn that off. And I think Will Appleton will be joining us in just a few minutes, and we'll recognize him as he joins. But we can go ahead and move on with the approval of minutes from the February 2nd, 2022 Parks Commission meeting. If there's a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
And any discussion or amendments or? It looked great to me. All in favor of approving the minutes as written? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. All right, minutes approved as written. All right, well, we're going to go jump right into the presentation with Robin from the Gig Harbor Conservation Land Fund. Robin, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you if you want to give us what you got and leave an opportunity for us to answer any questions or ask questions.
Absolutely. Okay, let me get this going. All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. My first time doing this. Thank you so much, Ben, and thanks to the rest of the commissioners for allowing me to have a few minutes. I think Ben said about 10 minutes, so I will try to keep it to that, and you can definitely hold up some fingers if I'm going over it. Give me the signal. So I'm here to introduce the Gig Harbor Land Conservation Fund. I am extremely excited about this. This is a project that some community members have been working on since I think June of last year. So we've worked on it for quite a bit of time, doing research on other initiatives similar to this and figuring out the best way to structure it. It's a simple concept, and yet I think it's a pretty unique concept. And it's all in response to what we've all, I'm sure, been hearing around town, depending on who you talk to and how you talk to them, about concerns about loss of trees, loss of critical habitat, loss of wildlife corridors, and loss of open space as Gig Harbor has grown exponentially in the last 10, 15 years. So I know when I was walking neighborhoods for my city council race 3 years ago, I mean, I just heard it over and over again. I heard things like Gig Harbor's ruined, and it doesn't look like Gig Harbor anymore. We were losing our natural beauty, we're losing our character. And so this is in response to some of that, as well as the ecological and environmental impacts that we know we're experiencing around town, because we do live in a very environmentally sensitive area. So the mission of the fund, okay, see if I can read things, because all I can see are you guys. The mission of the fund is to conserve what we have in terms of targeted undeveloped properties in the greater Gig Harbor area. The fund is not limited to the city of Gig Harbor. It covers the city, the UGA, and all of the rest of unincorporated Gig Harbor. It also covers the Key Peninsula. However, I'll talk about some of our properties, but we did leave it really broad because this entire area is experiencing a lot of growth. So the reasons we want to conserve property, obviously, to retain the beauty of this area, to retain critical habitat for wildlife, what this area is really known for, and to ensure everybody, no matter whether you live in a dense neighborhood or one of the more spread out older communities, ensuring everybody has equitable access to natural open spaces, because we know that has definite health benefits for people, as well as our natural animal and plant life friends. So here are some pictures. You probably know exactly where these places are. The concern we've heard with the rapid growth, 69% over the last 10 years. Now I'll make a note that the entire area is growing because of the Growth Management Act. We do need to grow, and we're on track to meet and exceed those growth targets, but we want to make sure that there's a balance between growth and welcoming new folks in and making sure people have a place to live. We want to make sure that's balanced with taking a responsible approach to retaining open space, buffers, green spaces, and areas for people to enjoy and get out into nature as well. So again, we'll mention the loss of habitat. There's also areas that have cultural, anthropological, and other historical significance. And I know Stephanie could speak better to that than I in this area. We're so lucky to have such a historically rich area, and it's important to conserve some of those areas as well. So climate change, it's not just about beauty. We know that having trees and making sure that we're taking care of our tree stock is important to combat climate change. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir to you all that we know that trees remove carbon dioxide from the air, they store carbon, and they release oxygen. And I don't think anybody that went through last year's extreme heat event could, I'm sure some people do, but I'm not sure how folks can continue to question that climate change is happening and that it could have devastating effects on the human population, not to mention, of course, our animal and plant population. I mean, people passed away during last year's heat event. And although Gig Harbor is certainly in better shape than a lot of our more urban neighbors, anytime trees and the foliage cover is replaced with pavement and buildings and other surfaces of that sort, it's been shown to increase temperatures, certainly, especially if those areas are consolidated and really there's not a lot of shade. And we're certainly seeing more and more of that. One of the things we have to be concerned about in this area is stormwater, which is considered the largest water pollution problem in urban areas of Washington state. On one side of your screen there, you'll see a map that I pulled right off the city website. It's really interesting, and it shows all of the outfalls as well as all the catch basins and pipes all around town. And we're going to be talking about this area a little bit, so I included this segment. The picture I have is actually an outfall. I hope I'm using the right word, Matthew, but if you look towards the top of the picture, that's actually Austin Street. And on the other side of the road there is a property that we're going to be talking about. I think you can see my cursor, I'm not sure. Right north of Austin is a property I'm going to mention. And that property, the stormwater comes right down off of it, right across the street, collecting debris and chemicals and dumping right into North Creek. So stormwater is a big deal, and it's something that we need to consider. And certainly the Gig Harbor Land Conservation Fund considers the impact of properties on stormwater and on nearby creeks and the bay as we're looking at kind of the level of importance of conserving a property. So ideal properties. Right now, we are absolutely open to any kind of property that somebody in the community feels is worthy of conservation. We're getting lots of emails, and we're talking to groups like the Greater Peninsula Conservancy and the city and Forterra to see if they're interested in those properties. We do have some ideas of priorities, and that is land that contains critical habitat and wildlife corridors, land that has archaeological or historical significance. Those are things that are definitely going to pique our interest. We are really interested in some of the areas in proximity to highly developed or rapidly developing areas. So areas that really need to make sure that if there is a little bit of open space left, that kind of open space could be really valuable to hold on to for the community, to have an area where people can get shade, can get respite, and to have that more natural experience. So we're looking at that, and land along sensitive shorelines. Now, I imagine most of the land that we're going to be conserving, I shouldn't imagine, but I imagine a lot of it's going to be outside the city limits, just because there's not a lot of land left within the city limits that's undeveloped, but we're willing to look at anything. And certainly if there is something within the city or the UGA or right outside that we can hold on to for the benefit of the community and for the benefit of our animals and streams and creeks, we're definitely interested in looking at that. So how it works, we don't actually own land. We're not going to buy land and hold land ourselves. We will work with a receiving agency. That could be the City of Gig Harbor. That could be the Pierce Conservation District, the Greater Peninsula Conservancy, Forterra, PennMet, KeyPen. It could even be an individual nonprofit like the Harbor History Museum, Stephanie, or a Harbor Wild Watch. If a nonprofit finds a piece of land that they want to conserve, that's fantastic. It has to have a willing seller, obviously. And then our two big requirements is that it needs to commit to have a restrictive covenant recorded on title, that the property will be conserved forever and ever, and that it will be open to the public. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to have bathrooms and parking spaces or anything like that, but the public needs to have the right to go onto the property because, you know, we're soliciting funds from the public. In terms of funding the property, should an agency, for example, like the city, come to us and say, yes, you know, we'd love to contribute and help you purchase this property. Ideally, down the road, we'll have a big pot of money that we can just make grants from. That's our dream. But right now, we don't have that. We're brand new. And so we'll be creating a fundraising plan for each individual property. And if any of you or anybody you know would like to serve on a fundraising committee or volunteer in another way, we would love that. If you're interested in the technicalities of this, I'm happy to answer questions individually, but I have a couple details here. The fund is held by the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation. They have been around for, I believe, over 100 years. They manage hundreds of funds, including nonprofit funds out here in the Gig Harbor and Key Peninsula area, the Long Branch Improvement Club. I know they've done some work with the museum. They worked with Gig Harbor Now, our new newspaper, until the newspaper matured and became its own 501c3. So they've got just a fantastic track record. Because of that, any donations to the fund are fully tax deductible. We use their 501c3, so completely tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law. And almost all of that money will go to the property purchase, 98.75%. The Tacoma Foundation takes a small percentage, 1.25%, for their fund management fees, which are the lowest we could find. And the advisory board, myself and 5 other people, we are completely volunteers. There is no staff and we get no operating funds, which is a bit of a challenge as we're talking about purchasing signs and getting things printed. So, you know, we welcome donations of folks that are not interested in a tax deduction because operating funds are helpful as well, but we're making it work. We have our fund invested in short-term investments because we need that money ready to go when a property comes up for sale. We want to be able to say yes and have that money really accessible. However, eventually we're going to work towards having an endowment, particularly seeded with planned gifts, probably, so that we've got, again, that growing pot of money for sustainability into the future, because, you know, this is going to be a need for a long, long time. I'm really excited to talk about our first project, which is in support of the city of Gig Harbor. You guys probably have heard there in the orange outlined area, the city is under contract for a little over 5 acres. It's just north of Donkey Creek Park there. There is preliminary plat approval for 18 homes and a road going through there. And this is a property that I kind of referenced earlier, has an exemption for their stormwater. It's because they had a development agreement from, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. They don't have to have a retention pond or a treatment vault on the property. They do have to have a filter in one of their catch basins. And Matthew, I'm sorry if I'm completely using the wrong words, but you can correct me afterwards. But basically, it's not good. And the stormwater is going to go right off all of these homes and roofs and roads across Austin Street, with just the benefit of a filter in this basin here, and into Donkey Creek, which is, of course, a really prolific salmon stream. This is also part of the whole ancestral homelands of the Squabash people, where their main village site, 12 Cut, was located. So that's another reason that, you know, we're really excited about preserving and conserving land in this whole 12 Cut estuary watershed area. Oh, I thought there was another one here. Oh, here. So you can see here, this is the property I'm talking about, but across the street is 7 other properties that the city is working on conserving because of North Creek flowing right through here. And as we know, streamside forest is incredibly important for the health of salmon. This is also, again, extremely important for cultural resources. And you can see we have all sorts of ideas for trails to go through here. And a trail through here somehow will be part of that whole network. Here's a couple of pictures of the property. We toured it the other day with Mr. Keogh. He was kind enough to tour us through. This was the old Burnham homestead. Stephanie can speak more to that if she likes. She has way more information, but there has been some activity on this property. So you'll see some younger trees and some exposed areas. So lots of opportunities for invasive species removal and for plantings of some of our Washington native trees, which is, a good thing as more trees are being removed from other parts of the community. This is our advisory board. You might recognize some of these folks, and all of their biographies are on our website, but I'll just point out a few. Jennifer Keating, you guys probably know her because she's with the Puyallup tribe. She's a Gig Harbor resident, very involved here. Michael Behrens he served on the founding board of Harbor Wild Watch with me like 16 years ago, and he is a marine biologist at PLU. And I'll mention Dennis Moore. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. He's a fish biologist that worked in forestry and with the Muckleshoot tribe for a long, long time. So here is how you can help. We say it takes a maritime village. That is our website, gigharborlandconservation.com. Because the purchase of the property that we were just talking about, the 5 acres, is not guaranteed at this point. What we're going to be doing is taking pledges, and our goal is $50,000. So if anybody would like to make a pledge, we just need their name and the pledge amount. And as soon as we have a closing date and closing is more assured, we'll be collecting those pledges for that property. And then we have all sorts of other opportunities in terms of cash donations, planned gifts. We can do, because of our collaboration with the Tacoma Foundation, we can do stocks, real estate, business interests, all sorts of complex gifts. The sky's the limit. So that's really a benefit to us. And then we are really in need of some volunteers. If anybody's interested in kind of really getting their hands in and doing some work, we've got a great advisory board, but we're planning an Earth Day or something around that event in April. We need to do a newsletter. We've got some graphic design work. We need some help fundraising for this North Creek project, our portion of it. So if anybody's interested in doing anything, certainly get in touch with me or one of our members, and we will connect you. We would really appreciate the assistance. And that is all I've got. I'm happy to answer questions.
I have a question for you, Robin. So tell me a little bit more about how this program works with the city.
Okay, well, so it's not just the city, it's whoever comes to us with a land project. So in this case, the city said, we've got this property that we'd like to purchase. We'd love to have the community contribute. And so really, we looked at the property, we toured the property, we came up with what we thought was a reasonable fundraising goal for us, and we came up with $50,000. And now, really, we are on our own raising those funds. And like I mentioned, we're going to raise pledges just because nothing's guaranteed. But our contribution, we're hoping, will strengthen the grant that the city is going for with the county, because they're going to see it's not just the county money. We've got all sorts of community members pitching in. So at the end of the day, assuming all goes well with the city's feasibility study and doing their due diligence, then we will deliver a check to Matthew or to the mayor or to escrow directly, however that works, and they'll make the purchase. Is that what you were asking, Stephanie?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, because ultimately the city would own the property.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. We don't want to own anything. We are here to help fill the gaps. We're here to help provide matching dollars. Like the county grant requires a match. The city's providing a lot of that, but we want to provide some as well to show that community support.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Thank
we have no ownership interest in it at all.
Okay.
Stephanie, it was the Burnham homestead, right?
Yeah, it was the Burnham homestead. It was actually going to be the original site of the museum as well. back in the day. And when they decided to purchase the property on the waterfront, they actually sold that as part of the fundraising effort to build the new museum. So yeah, and actually Shenandoah was up there for a number of years while they were doing the initial assessment and dismantling of the boat while they were getting ready to do restoration work. So
Yeah, a lot of history. So we can then, maybe there's a sign about that that can then point people down the hill to go see the Shenandoah.
wow, yeah. And it was also the site of the it was actually the Babbitt. It was owned by the Babbitt family for many, many years. And the museum actually purchased it from the Babbitts and then sold it later. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's great
definitely
history.
got a deep history. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
That is really interesting. Thank you. Welcome, Will Appleton, to the meeting. Robin Denson has just finished up a presentation on the Gig Harbor Land Conservation Fund. Sorry you missed that.
Yeah, I am too. I apologize for being late.
That's
No worries, no worries. But do you have any, I mean, you're more than welcome to jump with any questions, but Robin, I got a couple questions. So it's just a member or a landowner comes to you and proposes it, or just to conserve the property? Is that all that it takes?
So the way it's supposed to happen is an entity like the city or the Greater Peninsula Conservancy or Penn Met. Hopefully they've done the work in getting the willing seller and working out a deal with the seller, and then they come to us and they say, hey, we're going for this RCO grant and this county grant. Can you help us with the 10% match? How it seems to be happening is that I'm getting lots of emails from people saying, hey, look at this property. It's so beautiful. Can we conserve it? So what I've been doing is I'll do a little research. I've been sending it to our friends at the Greater Peninsula Conservancy because, well, most of these properties are out of the city. Otherwise, I'd probably send them to Matt. And then they look and see if it's something they're interested in or not, or give feedback. So we're trying to do our best to match properties, especially if it's an owner, with an entity like a Forterra or Greater Peninsula Conservancy, or whatever we think might be a good fit. And I've even had several private landowners, this has been cool, reach out and say, I've got this big parcel, we're probably going to be moving, but I want to keep it in forest. We've got the house, I want to keep the rest of it in forest. What can we do? And so I'm able to refer them to a real estate attorney who can put a conservation easement on it or a forestry management plan. I had a Fox Island woman call me, and she has this little nonprofit that was formed just to purchase this 12-acre land, virgin forest on Fox Island. They already own it, it's a nonprofit, but they want to make sure it is never developed. So I referred them to one of the attorneys in town. I said, it's probably going to cost you like $300 or something, because everybody wants this to happen. Drop a conservation easement and you'll be set forever and ever. So we're trying to be a resource to folks as much as possible.
That's awesome. What a great benefit to our community. Thanks for all your hard work on this.
Everybody can be a part of it.
Yeah. So, and then your vetting process for the properties and whether or not you contribute was it 3 kind of qualifiers?
Yes. Okay. So it's a little fluid, and it might get more formal when we have more properties coming in. The county has a really great kind of scoring sheet that we've used, that we kind of go off it, and we'll develop something like that of our own, more specific to this area. But like I said, we're really interested in properties that are filling a community need. So if they're in a highly developed area that kind of needs that open space, we're really interested in any kind of critical habitat, salmon streams or wildlife corridors, land that is contiguous to other open space for trails or wildlife corridors. That's really important to us. And it's also important to granting entities like the county. So we want to be competitive. And shoreline, goodness, with the landslides happening more and more, we want to protect our shorelines for the wildlife that lives on and in the water and around the water, as well as just making smart decisions for where to build and where to develop.
Great. Any other questions for Robin?
Not
No,
a
that's
question, but I think it's a fantastic thing, Robin.
Yeah.
Glad that you and the others on the advisory board are putting your efforts into that, because it's fantastic.
Thank you, Louise.
Mhm. was great.
Oh, and let me just note that Georgina has been like our advisor all along. She has edited things. I send stuff to her and she's like, well, what about this? And what about that? So she's been really helpful. So thank you, Georgina.
Oh, you're welcome. I was happy to do it anytime.
Awesome.
Very grateful. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right, Robin, thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.
Right. Yeah, well, sorry you missed that. Feel free to jump on the YouTube once that gets posted and do a recap. But it sounded like she's also got a few other presentations lined up. One at Heron's Key coming up. If you want to try and get in on one of the future presentations. But yeah, feel free to jump on the YouTube and watch this. Oh, speaking of YouTube, I did notice I watched our meeting from last month and I had issues with my audio. Is there any complications like last month? I noticed I was kind of in and out, and so I don't know if something was just clogged up or something, but
It's fine
you,
tonight.
all right, let me know if there is an issue at all, please. And I'll switch to like some headphones or something. Jumping right into old business. Item number 1, discussion of the 2022 work plan, work program. So this kind of comes from the homework that we were working on, setting goals and values to help formulate our work program. So I don't know, what might be the best way? Do you guys want to kind of discuss this? Do you want to go over the 6 Parks Commission duties and then kind of discuss what values we come up with off those? Or do you just want to go round robin and each person take a turn stating their values and goals that they came up with over the last month? Or
I think we should
you
march
guys
down
have-
the list.
yeah, just go down the list based on each item. Okay. We have those here. So, okay, so I don't know if it'd be easier to share my screen or just say it out loud. So, first duty of ours is, as directed by the council, the commission may make formal investigations and informal surveys concerning the future park, playground, and recreation resources of the city. So just based on that one, one of the values that I came up with was, let me scroll down, sorry, was, developing up, a cohesive and efficient parks program. And one of the goals was, developing a pros plan was, as part of that. So I think that's more of one that was already completed, but it's one that'll be reoccurring every 6 years. So I think that one might be able to go into the future as well, but not, this intermediate work plan that we're working on, which is, the 1 to 3 year time span that we're looking at. So does anybody else have any values they derived off of that one?
Can you put that one on the, can you share your?
Yeah, I can do that.
Ben, if I can help you out, I'm happy to share too.
Yeah, please, Matthew. That way I can kind of keep my
Yeah,
working.
so you can talk.
Thank you. I had a feeling yeah, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that.
So I'm trying to enlarge in this. Is that showing?
Yep.
Okay. I happen to have been taking notes, almost like a whiteboard for you, Ben, but the value you just spoke to in the pros plan.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
So one of my thoughts on this particular one was around that kind of Google survey that I did of all the parks, and that now it's been a year since we did that, right, at least, and that we could redo it. Do it, use that same tool, do it again, so we have comparative assessments of the parks. But the value is to get data about the parks, or to have current, up-to-date surveys. It is a survey. That was a survey tool. And if it needs to be different, I'm fine with that. My ego is not all caught up in that particular formulation. But I think having a tool and doing assessments routinely is helpful.
everyone
Absolutely.
able to follow along right now? And Georgina, are you able to see the letter A?
Yes,
Okay.
I can. Mhm.
I would echo that comment. I think Louise made regarding just being able to do kind of the informal surveys and do it more often than not, or be able to continuously kind of gather information and feedback from the community about what they may want to see. I don't know whether we do that on any regular frequency now, and have a mechanism by which, we can gather that input.
Well, and we had talked about that, but hadn't done it in part because there was no parks manager. But one possibility is to put a link, whether it's to the Google survey I did or to a shorter version of it. But that would, is there a way for citizens to provide information? At the time, the tool that I made was intended for parks commissioners and city council and some city staff like Jeff or Terry. It wasn't intended really for the public. So that's worth talking about. If having a survey tool, is it one tool? Is it a more detailed one for people like us and an easier one for the public? What do we want to do there? But because we have more information, we can make more critical assessments. I don't mean critical in the negative sense, but we would be more apt to take the time to be more thorough in our assessments and to have developed common language about what it means for a park to be in quote unquote good condition, right? And the public may or may not have that same sensibility nor the time and willingness to do the long version.
Yeah, it's just real quick. I mean, I like almost every weekend I'll do a route in the main part of the harbor where I walk and probably hit 4 to 5 parks, and just walk through them. And I think it'd be awesome to have maybe, is it URL codes? Is that the code that you?
The
Anyway,
QR code? Maybe a
yeah.
QR code on the park?
Right. So at entrances to, or even along paths where it's just like a placard where you can hit it and it just says, hey, you have a comment, you have a thought, and people can connect up to the website and, provide a comment while they're actually using the park or while it's fresh in their mind. I don't know, maybe a great way to gather input to help inform us. And I think it'd probably be pretty inexpensive to do as well.
It's a great way to gather real-time data and, a lot of it easily,
It's
Kinda
so exciting
crowdsource
to me,
that data.
actually. I just think you'd be really engaging users and they would feel like they're being heard ideally too. I mean, it is a management issue as how that data comes to us and what we can really do with it all. But I do like the engagement aspect. Could I just ask if Luis would clarify what value, when you first started talking about this, you said to get data and current information. I'm just kind of like, what is the actual outcome? I'd like to tie it to an outcome or a value in a work plan.
Well, the part of that is part of the value was for that community, getting community input into the quality of the parks, and community. I'm including us in community in that sense. But
community input. Yeah.
Well, Ben, we obviously can move on, and we're already getting off to a good start with just letter A. I did want you guys to see that duty as directed, that you can, in your work plan, suggest that certain things need to be studied. I wrote that at the bottom here. You could pose an inquiry that you really think needs to be addressed. I know that's kind of probably not a burning issue given we just did pros, but just wanted to keep in mind that some of you have personal goals and maybe an interest in seeing something get studied, and that's relevant under letter A. Would you like Ben to see if people want to offer any of that before we move on from A, like that their own personal goals might reflect this?
Absolutely. Let's take some time to do that as well.
I just wanted to add on to this that it is the people who use the parks the most. They also have their own values for that park. And I know with Shore Park, because it's right next door to me, I obviously I've gotten very interested in that. And the pros plan, you know, because I noticed a problem with Shore, I'm not as familiar with the others in an in-depth way. I do go to the other parks. I do see, you know, areas where maintenance is a bit of an issue, or maybe there needs to be some upgrading. But I do think that communicating with the people who use these parks regularly would be a good idea, because it may not be as apparent to us as it is to them when they're looking at these parks in more detail. And then, you know, with the pros plan, not always identifying the standards perhaps that we should probably have. Do we have standards? Do we have maintenance standards that we can use?
So Georgina, on that question, we do not have formal park standards.
Mhm.
We do have some expectations of developers when we ask them to provide recreation spaces, and we certainly have safety standards when we're providing, but we have not adopted formal development regulations that apply to parks or trails. And it is something that you or the commission can encourage us to do and help us do that with the public. It's definitely a work plan item. I can't say it'll be a priority of the city administration, but that doesn't mean it's not your priority.
So what currently is in place, how we communicate with the public other than public comment? But I mean, if we really want some feedback, should this be an agenda item perhaps that we publicize for the public to speak about their own parks and tell us what they think? Or is that opening up a can of worms? I don't know.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Georgina, because it goes directly to your purpose. And this is my perspective, and I should let others speak on it. But Terry has had a long experience with the city and some of your commissioners. But you have a public forum every month, and it's meant to be a public forum and to take public comment. We're a little remiss that we haven't even done that in tonight's meeting, but we should always be doing that. And what we do is we also make sure that our agenda items are open. So public comment on any subject related to parks, it's appropriate to come to the commission, and it's meant to be heard as representatives of the community, and then for your advice to council.
I think it's great. I think agenda items should be open. I definitely do. Yeah. But, you know, I also would like us, I think it's very important to have standards, because when I go into some of the parks like City Green and I see that playground and I think, how did it get to that point? You know, why wasn't it noticed? And I think it is great that the Parks Commission does tour the sites, and maybe we could schedule those on a regular, like 6-month basis or something, where we actually tour them together and we can exchange, you know, thoughts and observations. But it just makes me wonder, how did that happen? How did that particular playground get to that point? It needs to be caught sooner.
Okay, so a potential work item would be development standards for parks. And then I'm hearing about active, I don't know if you want to say it's a commissioner role, but an opportunity to get out in the community, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Will, look like you, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm actually interested in is really trying to look into how the city can revitalize the hatchery operation on Donkey Creek. What can we do to get that back on its feet and prevent it from just becoming a memory? And so, yeah, I'm motivated to try to do that.
Awesome. And that was at Donkey Creek, also known as North Creek.
Right. We're hard to have a chum festival if you don't have any chum. I mean, you could fake it.
You
I'll
can
just
think
add
about them.
To your point, Will, there has been some concern about a virus in the hatchery. So that's why it hasn't really been working, but I'm sure that the Gig Harbor fishermen would definitely want to see that working again. So that's definitely on the list to talk to them about that.
don't know if you saw, I heard on the news tonight on the way home, but the hatchery up the road, not Gig Harbors, but they lost 3.5 million chum over the weekend to a burned out pump and not enough water in the tanks, and they died. Right. And so that's a huge loss, 3.5 million baby salmon, you know, from that hatchery. So those kind of losses are tough, and they have an impact for years.
Yeah, there's a huge educational component with that hatchery site too. So we really want to make sure that we get that back up and running the way it's supposed to, and certainly support the Gig Harbor Fishermen's Club, because they've been maintaining that, I think, since the 1970s.
Stephanie, may I call that community education as a value?
Absolutely.
And did you want me to write anything more down about the fishermen and supporting them?
Well, I definitely think, yes, we should say that we want to support the Gig Harbor Fishermen's Club in the support of the chum hatchery, for sure.
Yeah, I think community education, so even in this last year, you know, there's been the big effort on recognizing the tribal history in the harbor, some conservation related pieces, and now this hatchery piece would be great as well. But I think that community education is multi-layered.
Super. I think we've got some good comments on this one.
I think so too. That might be a good point to jump off to the next one then.
Yeah, let me do that and just call that up.
So as directed by the council, the commission may formulate draft plans for the future development of the parks and playground system of the city.
So for this one, this seemed an obvious part to put the Crescent Creek visioning process in, since that's something that's going to happen in this time period.
Louise, I'm sorry, I couldn't understand. You said which process?
For Crescent Creek,
The master plan for Crescent Creek.
master plan for Crescent Creek.
And we can always call up your draft version, but you did have that, and your previous draft has a couple of projects on it that are timely because they were associated with allocated funds.
Matthew, can I get just a little more clarification on this? What is exactly meant by formulate draft plans for future development? I mean, is that so I'm an engineer. I have a hard, this is planner speak, and I want to, like, what does that really mean? Like, does it mean we generally say, hey, we think in concept, this is what it should be? Or are we directing 10% designs to be forwarded? What does that mean?
You know, well, I'm glad you asked. And I would say it's sort of reflecting what we're doing tonight. You help establish that this does represent the community interest, and you establish a value, and you establish with the community process what outcomes you expect. And then you can get to the point of doing some 30%, or I guess you could call it conceptual drawings and program drawings. And you're not drafting those drawings, but you're seeing them. It's true, it becomes more technical. And after that, the true drafting of construction plans, development standards, that's not something that would come to you.
Right.
But it is your job to help us ensure that we're meeting the goals and outcomes desired of the community. I will say that you could, and it's not like you have to specify this now, but you could step forward, the commission can step forward and be its own can be its own stakeholder group, meaning you could be the, and I'm not recommending this, but you could be the visioning committee for Crescent Creek Master Plan. I would say best practice would say, really, you need the stakeholders around the park and people who use it to be on the visioning committee. And your commission usually is available to help then just bring it into the city and say, oh, there's just something else I want to consider because I'm aware of master plans elsewhere, using your system knowledge to maybe advance a master plan. But it is true, you can say, we're going to do a master plan. And in fact, your subcommittee did a lot of work on the pros plan. So it doesn't always tie itself to a site when it says draft plans. You could have a plan as a commission to talk about adaptive recreation, which means for handicapped individuals, and figuring out how we should have such a plan. And though your staff would try to do the work for you as best I can, and Terry can, really you could take an active role in drafting a plan on a subject area of interest to you. So I wanted to point out that that's a generic word, and I'm glad we're thinking big, because I think you need to, as a commission, figure out what's most meaningful to you as individuals and into your community, and then we'll be on target. So we listed master plan for Crescent Creek, and you don't have to say whether or not, and I use CP for community park. You don't have to define your role today, but you can put this on a work plan as something, as an outcome that you want to have. You can tell me that you have a value associated with it, and that might indicate, oversight by the commission.
So what we discussed kind of up above in A with a QR code and surveying folks, that would obviously help inform the commission about how people feel about what that plan might look like, or future plans.
I would say inform commissioners and decision makers. Any other plans coming to mind? Playground system of the city? Yep.
Yep. So, I mean, master plans for individual parks. I know we have 2 or 3 existing ones already. The PROS plan, which is the long range plan. The the active transportation plan. I know that falls under the transportation component of the comprehensive plan, but I feel like there's some crossover with the parks and the Cushman Trail. And then
I have one too.
the urban canopy plan?
Yep, the urban forest initiative. And then generally, I was talking to Robin Denson and Roger on the council, a couple of council people, and one of the things they were interested in doing citywide on the council was more about taking steps for long-term sustainability in the city. That's a combination. Sustainability covers a bunch of different topics, right? From lesser use of plastics to whatever. But parks can have a piece of that too. How do our parks contribute to sustainability? Is that around saving bees? Is that around
Recycling receptacles?
Recycling, is that around, what is it around, right? All kinds of things. Planting. So some of all of our desires for conservation and these sorts of things could be covered in a sustainability, if parks contributing to the city's sustainability.
So I have a question whether historic preservation would fall into this particular section
I think
of the
so.
plan or not. Yeah.
Well, let's placehold it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no harm in putting it in.
Yeah.
What
'cause I think
would
it's
you
very
say,
important to
Stephanie?
put in the plan. Yeah.
Stephanie, what kind of historic preservation plan are you envisioning? Could we just get an idea of it?
Yeah, well, I think you have to look both specifically and kind of an umbrella. And what I'm thinking about is historic preservation plans for historic structures that are in park property or on park property. For example, Scansey Net Shed is a good example of that. The Masonic Lodge is, of course, part of that. But I think that might be more of a visioning part of that plan. So, and it may be that we have to put into this, a cohesive evaluation of some of the historic structures to make sure that they're getting the care and treatment that they need in order to maintain their existence, because many of them are challenged for sure. So.
Matthew, maybe sub-bullet after historic preservation, the Masonic Lodge, the barn, and the Scansy Net Shed.
Wilkinson Barn.
Yeah.
For
I
sure.
also, in my mind, historic preservation comes to my mind for Crescent Creek for this last year since we've been working with the tribe. I recognize that it's probably not very far under the lawn there that we start hitting tribal artifacts. The women were there for a long time, and they were using tools and weaving and doing food preparation and all of that in that place. And so I think that's probably a historic site that's just barely under the surface.
Mhm.
And Louise, you probably know this, but we have some structures there from the Conservation Corps back from the 30s and 40s. And I don't have my days straight, but
Yeah.
it was pretty impressive to this newcomer. I was excited to see those.
Awesome.
Can
I
I-
think that's
Can I just add in, I don't know whether this is appropriate, but since we're talking about Crescent Creek a little bit here, you know, one of the thoughts that I had was trying to look at coordinating improvements in the park with potential removal and replacement of that culvert with a bridge or some type of which would effectively be a public works project. So over the long term, that's probably going to be considered a barrier and would ultimately be removed. But how might that, if that were to be thought through, how might that, I guess, the park benefit from that, up to and including a high tide kayak launch point? But
Well, we better slow down on getting too many ideas for Crescent Creek here in this spot. But I do like, Will, that you're expressing broader ideas of values, like culvert removal might be worthy of documenting. You know, we'll ultimately have to find a consensus point, but do we as a commission, do you as a commission value fish removal of fish barriers? I would suspect you do. So, but I'll ask you, you mentioned the culvert, what's the value?
go ahead, Louise.
The value is enhancing wildlife access. Right, or something like that.
Yeah, I think
Anyone else can chip in there.
Yeah, I think it's restoring wildlife habitat. Mhm.
Because that would, as a value, that would cover several things we've talked about, including making the conservation corridors, you know, transportation corridors for wildlife and other things.
So I appreciate you guys letting me bounce things around, and I had to put value at the top just for that planner mind and maybe assistance for you as you think more on this stuff. Where do we start? And the value is always really important. And then I keep loving that you, encouraging us all to think about outcomes. What can you actually outcome? So that's just the nomenclature I'm using: values, tools, and outcomes at the moment.
okay. Can I add on to the values? Kind of on the flip side, probably like an equity value and water accessibility.
Indeed.
Great. I love that you brought up equity. You have some projects. We probably don't have time to totally look at the whole 6-year plan and the projects that are listed. Some of them are relevant to put in your work plan, including the ADA research charge that we put in the pros plan to get on top of an ADA transition plan for our parks. And I would suggest, you know, like I'd be able to do some of that homework for you and insert, but that probably is under letter A. A tool would be your ADA transition plan. It's a plan or it's an investigation. I'm not sure. It's either A or B.
I'm sure we'll get into that point where there's crossover between them too.
Yeah.
You know, and to go along for you know, a tool for that, and that might, you know, like I said, go into the crossover for A is, you know, whether that be like site investigation, like an informal site investigation to see what waterfront parks do have that potential for, you know, waterfront access. You know, whether that's, you know, trail development or, you know, seeing if there's something there at the old ferry landing or other parks around the harbor.
So I
Ben,
wanted
did you
to,
just give me an outcome about
Yeah.
shoreline?
Yeah,
What would you say the outcome was? Shoreline access or shoreline?
shoreline access.
Okay, thank you. I think that's an incredible one to have. And I think, you know, hopefully you'll be able to look back as a commission and say, I did do work on that and we accomplished that. Are you ready to go on to C?
Sure.
can I add?
Yeah.
Can I add one up there? Okay, so when you're looking at shore, it is supposed to have a master plan in 2025, but I think there is a lot that's going to have to be decided before you get to that point, and hopefully 2025 it's really going to happen then. But it currently it's going to have land access to it, and that land is going to be developed or landscaped by the developer, and there is a plan for that already that's been accepted. However, there is going to be a new amenity, and so there are two that have been discussed. One is a dog park and the other one is a community garden with an environmental center. And the issue is that if the city allows the developer to landscape that second half, it's all going to have to come out for either of those amenities, which is a big waste. And so I can see where all of those tools really apply to shore. It also, a lot of people don't know it's named after Clarence Shore because there's no historic marker there at all. And he was a pretty significant person for in the history books for North Gig Harbor. And so, but just about everything on the tools really apply. And I think that there needs to be work put in place in order to get to that master plan. So we have to ensure that the issues that we have with shore aren't continued on into that master planning phase. It needs to, we can't wait that long. It's just a mess. So the drainage issues, it's like, it needs to be done in stages. The drainage issues are extremely serious. And then you have, what are we going to do with this developer who wants to landscape it in a passive use, whereas it's going to become an active use? And by the way, this is the only public park in Harbor Hill. And there are a lot of HOA parks. In fact, the residential area of Harbor Hill is all HOA. And so the HOAs have all these pocket parks, and they have playgrounds, and they have bocce ball, and they have barbecue and picnic areas and shelters. And so we have to be very careful with shore. We can't just repeat what they have in already available. And it does concern me, that 45.5% that I think about a lot, about you know, how little used the playgrounds are in the city parks. And so obviously whatever ends up happening at shore should be meaningful and significant for the local neighborhood. And so anyway, that's kind of an issue I have, is how do we get from here to the master plan? Can we depend on 2025 being the year we have the master plan? What do we do with the whole amenity idea? Do we start on that before and say, okay, we're going to award an amenity, and that way it gives these people time to actually plan out their amenity. So it may not be able to actually be constructed right away. There's going to be a development next door for the village at Harbor Hill, which is going to be very noisy and very dusty. So it's actually a really, it's an interesting project, I think, to make sure that at the end of the day, it's been planned well, the stages all worked, and the tools were correct. That, you know, we do have to consider sustainability, obviously, and all of those tools. And what are we going to do in the meantime so that it can be used now? And are we really going to let this developer put in all this landscaping that's going to have to be taken out? And could we arrange whereby the developer was to tell us how much money it's going to cost for him to do that landscaping, and that money would then be a credit for whoever is implementing the amenity, because they could obviously use the money and it would just be a waste of money otherwise. So those are what I've come up with.
Thank you, Georgina. It's appreciated.
You're welcome.
I don't have an immediate answer to that,
Yeah,
but you know, I think you're right in that, you know, there is definitely some assessments and baselines that need to be set in order to, you know, I mean, you've spoken a few times on the conditions, and you know, and I feel like they're being reported somewhere. I want you to think that, I don't want to think that they're like going nowhere, because I mean, and how is it going to get fixed?
Obviously, when I speak about it, I'm representing the neighborhood. So
Right.
the neighborhood has a real problem with it, and I keep having to give them updates every month. I can't tell them much each time. It's getting embarrassing, to be quite honest. I want to hide under the table.
Yeah. So Georgina, I have a question. Is all of the land that is allocated to Shaw Park currently developed
No.
into a park setting?
No, so we're getting about, I don't know, what would you say it is, Matt, about another 40% or?
That's a fair number. Mhm.
What we have now, yeah. But then there's this village at Harbour Hill, and I'm not sure this is the same developer who is going to give this land to the city, but you know, when are they going to decide about parking? So far, there's no off-site parking for sure. It's only on the street. If you have an amenity, you're going to need to have parking.
Right. And honestly, I mean, being at the museum next to Austin Park, we provide parking for that park, not by agreement by the city, but by default.
Right.
And so almost every development that is going to be in that area is going to be default parking for whatever park is nearby.
Right.
And whether that's part of the plan or not is, you know, to be determined. But I think ultimately, I think that the plan for the park should dictate how the park is developed, not the developer
Yes,
dictating how the park is developed.
absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing is on the parking, you know, can the city make a deal with the developer that because they'll have a lot of parking, and I don't know if they're going to need it all, that the park can have some parking spaces rather than we now have to have parking intrude upon the space. Because if you're looking, for instance, at a community garden and environmental center, that will take up all of that room. So then to give up space to parking is difficult, when perhaps we could make an arrangement with the developer that we can have some assigned parking in that development.
Can you talk a little bit more about this environmental center and who is behind that, or like what the vision is?
I am actually.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
We have a committee, and it's we've been talking a lot to Bob Carr. In fact, Bob Carr is on our committee, and she is the manager of Wilkinson Farms Community Garden.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has, I'll actually send you the plan, Stephanie, so you can see it. But there are a lot of components, including a pollinator garden. There are a lot of mason bees in the area. Mm-hmm. And we would want to have some plots that would be donated to the food bank. We are looking to work with Swiftwater. There's a trail actually from Swiftwater to Shore. And those are the children we're primarily looking to provide environmental education to an outdoor education component for Swiftwater with the environmental center. And so, yeah, I'll send you, it's quite detailed. I will send you the plan if you like.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would
I
love
live
to
in
work
that
with you
area, so
too.
I know
I'd like
exactly what you're talking about in terms of the trails and whatnot.
Yeah, it's great. And also, you know, in order to protect the Harbor Hill open space even more, I would actually like to see it become part of Shore Park. So I don't, you know, that would be a really big thing. But maybe it could be, maybe that's something else we can talk about working towards before the actual master plan, so that it could then be perhaps considered in with the master plan.
Georgina, that's a perfect segue to number C, letter C.
Okay.
The commission may recommend to the city council regarding planning, promotion, acquisition, construction, and development of public recreational facilities and recreational programs.
There you go. I'm all done now.
No. I think we were already kind of getting there, but I just wanted to make it formal. So I think our conversation was already kind of leading to this one. So
yeah.
But Ben, can we get confirmation from the commissioners that they do want to spend a significant time reviewing current projects? Or because I think that that'll come at the expense of other things if you are to look at all projects. So it's kind of like we could go over them and we could have flexibility in your work schedule, but they also could take over your work.
So what work do you think that they would interfere with specifically?
I wouldn't say that it would interfere. It's about your work programs in the past have listed all city projects that are dealing with parks.
Right.
And you do get a monthly report, and community gets a monthly report on parks projects. If you were to look at each one and advise on the acquisition, construction, and development of recreation facilities and programs, I think it would be a little paralyzing, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
To do like reviews at like 30 and or 60% review. Is that what you're referring to?
I would suggest that for sure. Like we will take public input on programming and conceptual plans, and then we will show to you and to others how the plans are developing. But if you're going to recommend on the construction and the development throughout, that's where I get a little bit concerned, and on all projects. Like an example would be that it's probably next year's budget, but we are looking at getting a roller slide at Veterans Park. And that is something that's coming out of the master plan. And I would always like to check back with the community on master plans before jumping into a project. But I also don't want it necessarily to be that I need the commission to spend time looking at the fact that we're going to acquire a roller slide. I don't know if that's a good example, because it's not like I ever want to hide anything. I'm trying to bring out that some projects have already got a master plan behind it or an agreement. They have a design already in place, and I don't know that it's valued to bring it in front of you.
Don't you think it would be helpful though if the planning commission can look at how a master plan might shake out before it actually happens? Like, are there steps that need to be taken now or next year so that we're in good shape for a master plan?
Mm-hmm. There are, and I like that you're going that way. It's typically something a staff person should really be sure that we are coordinating and thinking about the permit costs and the procedures and phasing and investments, especially with infrastructure. So absolutely. And that is something I would say is happening. It's a good example of something that happens in-house and not so much on a public commission.
I'd love to see it happen on a public commission, to be quite honest. I
Okay.
really would. I think the public should be involved in it. I don't know how everyone else feels about that.
Could you just tell me kind of this for this exercise, what's the value?
Well, overall, it's meaningful and significant use for the local neighborhood.
Okay,
Meaningful and significant.
great discussion. I thought Will was ready to say something, but I don't mean to
Yeah.
step in.
Yeah, no, I just, looking at these, I would, I guess I would be in favor and primarily focusing on the planning, promotion and acquisition side of things. Once we're moving to construction and you're looking at the actual development at that point, it's the water's, in my mind, is far underneath the bridge and gone. So my thought is the commission should be really focused on planning, promotion, acquisition, and doing that through the collection of meaningful input from the community. So I don't know whether that can be reflected in the value in some fashion.
Just that general poll, does the commission want to generally see active park projects?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because I would have added that development, planning, acquisition, and development is what happens before the water goes under the bridge. Once that's been advised on, it's up to staff to figure out, and council approves it, staff figures out how to construct it, right, or acquire it, or whatever. But if we're developing master plans and things of that nature, doing the visioning for Crescent Creek or whatever it is, Ansich was a good example as well. You know, there was a huge role by lots of stakeholders, including the commission, to get Ansich designed. Then it's up to the city to build it.
So what would you say about Harbor Hill open space? Is that in a way an acquisition because it would be taken out of one inventory and put it into another? Like if it became part of Shore Park, if the boundary of Shore Park was expanded, would that be sort of an acquisition?
Well, it's certainly a development.
Right. Yeah.
In my opinion, I think it would be, but I mean, if you're adding it to the parks inventory, yeah.
Louise, when you mentioned that the commission got involved to get it designed, can you explain that? I mean, once the project was launched and there was a commitment to do the design, the commission's role were they involved in the design or just getting it to the point of saying, all right, here's the money, it's going to design? What was the role?
No, because there was significant dispute over what it should look like, right, and how big it should be, noticeably about whether it should be above the street or not, blocking the view of the neighbors. So there ended up being, we ended up with a process involved in clarifying who the stakeholders were, and that the stakeholders were the neighbors, the fisher folk, the canoe and kayak paddling team who is going to occupy a significant chunk of it, and community paddlers that are not the team, right? Just regular people with their paddleboards and kayaks. And then with that group, there were two, like the commission organized study sessions with those groups, and they met in real life 3 or 4 times and had significant feedback at this is what the fisher people really need. And then there were 2 people from those stakeholder groups that participated in every design meeting, every council study session, all kinds of, met with the architects on site, you know, really stayed in the game for 3 years, right? It wasn't a short period of time. Many meetings, and looking at the plans in detail and figuring it out.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it was helpful. And Louise, do you think I might be able to say that there are there are projects, and maybe the commission helps decide this, that there are projects that really do require more design involvement.
Sure.
Like there is an evaluation process, and as I was writing an outcome here, I was like, oh, I want to say it was especially helpful in Ansich, and I hear what you're saying. It really needed assurance of the stakeholders at every step, and it couldn't be taken for granted.
No, not at all. And it was not always fun, and it included having a paid professional mediator come in twice to help facilitate, mediator is not quite the right word, but there was professional facilitation, not just city staff, but others that helped with those, I don't know, Terry, what do you call it? Values clarification, around what that should look like.
Okay.
And there were some surprises from the council as well. I mean, one of the council members was the one that suggested expanding it back underneath the street in order for the longest boats to fit, right? Because that was one of the problems, right? That the building either had to go up, out, or back, and how do we do it? And you're trying to get input of, what are the needs and what are the possibilities? And I will say on that particular site, because it's useful for other projects, one of the first questions, we had our very first meeting for that design thing, and different people tossed out different things that they wanted. And there was a person at the city, and I don't remember his name, but he's the guy that is really good at saying no. And he would say things like,
Granite.
nope, it has to be 30 feet above the highest tide of the, nope, it has to be 15 feet to the west of the easement for the dock. He had this super detailed set of notes. And we finally kind of stopped and said, okay, let's go a different way. Can you tell us what is the permittable size of the box that could be built? Forget what the design elements is, just what's its footprint, what's its height, what's allowed. And then with knowing what the footprint was and the height, then we could start having among those stakeholder groups what it needed to look like. And it turned out, though it was permittable to have 18 feet above the street level, the value was that people driving by and walking by want to see the water. So we didn't build a 2-story building there. We built a rooftop garden instead, so that the boathouse didn't actually take away any walking space, because the roof is effectively, walkable ground, and then the area around it. I'm just using that as an example of how all the stakeholders were very much lobbying for the things that were important to them. And then the design keeps advancing for what is the possible permittable building. And
Just for my
as much as I chafed at it at the time, because it took forever, it took 7 years.
And was it the Parks Commission that then kind of acted as the liaison for the stakeholders or facilitated that conversation?
They helped, and I wasn't on the commission at the time, but the commission helped sponsor, some of those public comment sessions that were held at City Hall and down at the site, and they did help, and the staff had a huge role to play in all of that, of course, and they're so not taking away at all from not trying to inflate the role of the commission there either. But yeah, that's a big project, and it took many hands.
Yeah.
Well, and I think honestly, this goes back to the city's practice, and I will say practice because it is replicated numerous times, where they have historic sites or structures, or they're building new structures with the intention that there is an entity, a nonprofit entity, that is going to lease that facility and
Yeah.
operate it for recreational purposes.
Yes.
And so because of that particular golden circle, I should say, there were more stakeholders involved in that particular project than probably most any other. And Ben, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that's my observation on that particular topic. And I think that, that's a really important thing that we have to keep in mind as a commission, that if there are these other nonprofits that are stakeholders in park properties because they are providing public programming, that we have to consider that. And that's a kind of unusual thing in my experience. It's kind of an unusual element to what we offer in Gig Harbor as opposed to other places where their city or their county basically programs all of their historic sites. So, this is a really cool thing. It's also a really challenging thing. So I think that's just something we have to keep in mind as a commission.
You're absolutely
I
right,
like
Neil.
that, and we actually do rely a lot of times. And I think one thing commissioners can do when you talked about a goal number 1, or at least mission number 1, efficient park system, is there adequate maintenance, and is there adequate programming, and are we going to meet people's expectations? And so those are great questions. I know this is a big mess in front of you right now, but I do like that we're talking quite a bit about outcomes, and I would say like maintenance and programming outcomes are known. That's a great goal for you as a commissioners to keep on and keep asking about when a project is coming up.
And I suspect that similar to Ansich, Crescent Creek, because it's a big space and it has many possibilities and it's a historic site and that there will be many important stakeholders in that process.
Yes. Great examples. We better wrap up tonight on the work plan. I have a lot more materials, and obviously you have more letters, but I'll leave it to you to decide. Ben, if you want to try to do D, E, and F, or have me move on to something else. I do have other materials to show you related to the work program, but I don't want to belabor it either.
Right. I mean, this has been actually a pretty robust conversation, so I would hate to, drag it out another hour or two, but I want to give it time that it's due. But I don't feel like the D, E, and F are as involved, but I'd hate to cut us off short or, put us into the later hours of the evening. So maybe this might be a good opportunity to, take a pause and pick this conversation up next month.
Mhm.
And then we'll kind of go over what the additional materials you have for us, Matthew, and see if we can, incorporate that into the next conversation.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, maybe my screen's showing parks at the city of Gig Harbor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's just a few things in highlight that I thought were worthy of pointing out. I think a lot of you have this background, so it's not necessary. But I did want to communicate to you from the day I started here that we do need to work on some of our identity and language. And something I've been floating with administration is to call our work park development, the work that I'm doing. And it's shared by the community, represented by the Parks Commission, and staffed by both Public Works and Administration. I wanted you to see that the word park development relates to our system. That's the second paragraph. And that we have a focus on community coordination and desired service outcomes. So some of the language you heard me speaking about tonight is coming from a little bit of a staff perspective, that you are helping with community coordination and desired outcomes, but that you are helping represent parks development as well. So just thought that was worthy of sharing at the onset of your work program. Obviously, park development projects are prioritized through the PROS plan, as you well know, and PROS plans can be amended, but it is great to have a 6-year PROS plan. I thought I would show you that there are adopted goals for park development in the 2022 capital budget. And these are things that are worthy of thinking about, making sure you meet your work program. You don't have to get involved in these things. These are charges to the city staff by the administration. But you can see I highlighted, because you had previously brought this up, that there should be a master plan in 2022 for Crescent Creek Park. Cushman Trail Phase 5, we should be seeking grant funding for this. You can see that there was a discussion about trying to expand our facilities, including teams. I decided to highlight that because I really don't think that should be left to staff to figure out. And then I highlighted, because you have it in your pros plan, that we should start looking at the old ferry landing and tie it to the shoreline. So I can forward this kind of material to you, but I wanted you to see that there is some background. The city has also talked about creating a donation list for our parks. We really don't have a program, robust one that I know of, for you want to build a shelter, you want to give a park bench. There's discussion about what are donationable items and are appropriate to receive. And you can see here that the city anticipated us talking to the Arts Commission about this too, knowing that art is a prize component of a lot of park sites. I highlighted the recycling program that the staff has been asked to work on. You can see that there is education with the community, support from businesses and interest groups to launch a recycling program. There is city funding, not a lot, but set aside to start talking about some kind of agreement, maybe with a third party who would be in charge, a franchise agreement. And I don't have much more, I promise. But I thought I'd highlight, given that there's been some interest in our natural environment on the commission, the city will continue to install native trees. It's a $10,000 commitment to do so, but as this goes on, you could lap onto that and say, we also want to leverage that. We want to do more with the community on that. And you're doing that through Parks Appreciation Day already, maybe Earth Day, other options. And finally, I had the Cushman Trail. I just highlight this because it related to the pros plan and things I've heard. And you could be involved with the trail etiquette and signage and rule making that we need on the Cushman Trail to be coordinated with our partners. I'll stop there. I don't know if you guys want to ask me anything about these current goals of parks development, but I just want to point out that some of these make sense to be reflected in your work program.
Matthew, I do have a question. I know that this is not highlighted, but it is letter A on historic properties, and the Heritage Capital Project Fund program is coming up with deadlines in April and June. And those historic properties do qualify for potential heritage project funding. And I would highly encourage this city to work on a couple of grant applications. These do require a 2-to-1 match. So the city would have to match those funds, but even the volunteer hours of the commission and other volunteers that work on improvements for those parks where there are historic sites can qualify as a match. So I think this should be something that the city should be looking at, because it's a biennial program, and that's what funded the brick house project at Boat Park, as well as a couple other projects. So if that is something that the city is inclined to do, I would highly recommend that.
And the city has Wilkinson Farm stabilization on a list, and so it's already something we know we want to work on.
Yeah, and even though it's a barn and the barn program is separate from the Heritage Capital Project, it could still qualify. So I would really recommend trying to get that in there, because it's a robust program and it has a huge advocacy group that goes with it. So I would definitely recommend applying for that.
Definitely a question for you, or Matthew. You said that volunteer efforts in those parks would be counted towards match.
Yeah, as long as they are documented, and there's an hour for hour match of, like, if you have Parks Day and they're working in Wilkinson Park and the grant is for the Wilkinson Barn, any of those volunteer hours can be basically a dollar for dollar match.
Interesting. All right.
And they're valid at about $25 an hour. So it really makes a difference.
Okay.
I didn't know any of that. That's good to know.
And Matthew, as far as the visioning for the Masonic Lodge and this city park, Crescent Creek, where is the city at as far as the Masonic Lodge itself in preservation? Have they decided one way or the other if that's going to be Or is that going to be part of the visioning process? I know it's kind of been like a chicken and egg type deal.
You're absolutely right. It's been chicken and egg from what I've heard, and there's been a concern about getting into the master plan without knowing about the building and what we can actually, what's feasible with the building and its building condition. So limited investigation of the building has gone on, particularly around the question of ADA access so that it could become a public facility. That gives some ballpark ideas of the kinds of investment it would take to get to ADA, but it doesn't talk about what are the program potentials of the building. That hasn't been done. And so the chicken and egg question is, and I've been confronting this one, is can you do a master plan for the surrounding park without knowing the possibilities of that building? Is that building, and some people said you absolutely have to know whether that building can be a community center, for example, or an art studio. You need to know that before you do your park planning. I follow the logic. I would like to advocate that we actually take on both at the same time.
Me too.
And let that inform each other. It might give some less certainty, but I think you could lose possibilities when you delay a decision. But some people are arguing strongly that we should be doing the lodge assessment first.
I know the previous mayor was in favor of doing that assessment separately. And so is there any recommendation we can make or provide or,
Yes,
input or?
I think there is. I think that that's something you can put on your agenda. I don't think you should try to do that on the spot.
Okay.
But in terms of your work program, it's a good example of thinking about what kind of, I'm sorry to use the word again, but what kind of process and outcome and value do you really want to see happen when, and that you're watching for? And so that might go back to the efficiency value that you brought up, or stakeholder engagement at the right times, not after the fact. It's awfully hard to ask people, what do you want to do with the park? Sorry, you missed the first session when we decided what to do with the building.
Matthew, do you have any idea what the capacity is on that building? Like, and I speak specifically not of the preschool area down below, but of that Masonic Hall sort of.
I just toured it and I can get you square footage. I do have that, but not in my mind. It's a really intriguing space, that's for sure. There's a couple of different sides, different kinds of development that occurred in the project and the property. You can imagine the biggest room is the former lodge room, meeting room. And I would guess that room is, I shouldn't guess. I don't know.
Is it a park? Is it considered a park?
No, it's not actually. That would be part of the park master plan, is to incorporate it into the park boundaries. That's just something we do to talk about what's parkland and designated parkland, but it's actually outside the city, so it doesn't even have zoning of ours.
I don't think I've been in there in 30 years.
Yeah. So there are parcels around Crescent Creek that should be considered, including the Masonic Lodge, to be brought in within the park boundary. Sometimes, and this would be part of my next presentation if we even go there tonight, but sometimes when you take grant money, you do put boundaries on your property. At Crescent Creek, we actually don't have a grant that's got an active boundary other than the playground. When you take federal funds, for example, you almost have to commit everything. So there's decisions when and when not to put a parcel in the park boundary.
Okay.
So that might help you understand why some people would say, treat the building separately so you have all the flexibility you want. Don't tie it to park restrictions. But I think you can do both.
I like it, ambitious.
Well, some people would say it's a rabbit hole.
But isn't that, if we did it at the same time, and we're talking about, if we figure out what a highest and best use for the building is, which if it fits within the park highest and best use, then part of the recommendation is to merge it into the park system. And if the highest and best use is not, then we don't, right? And but at least that everybody gets to make or gets to contribute to making that decision.
I like that you said highest and best use. I'm going to break that down. Well, again, I wanted you, and I appreciate that feedback. Let me go ahead and just type up highest and best use. I don't want to lose that. And then I'll show you a different document, which you've seen before. Is that showing everyone?
Yep.
Yep. But
Well, it was my
make
great pleasure to put 2 big check marks on it.
Please make it bigger. Can you
Okay.
scale it up? For those of us that are blind. Thank you.
Yeah, so the fun part was putting in those big check marks.
Woohoo!
And obviously, we are going to be evolving this. It sounds like you guys are digging in and pretty interested in the materials that we've talked about tonight. So it'll be up to me and Terry to put together a record of what's been said so far. But this was your draft before, and I highlighted again things that were already in motion, or because of the budget, and or because I've already heard or in this plan. So regardless, Park Appreciation Day, that's on our agenda tonight, and we are committed to having one. So that's kind of a big piece of news if you didn't know. We're going to do that on April 9th. Your work plan draft already told us that we should do the Visioning Creek the visioning, and then include the Masonic Lodge status. You can see that there's some wording here to evaluate. Wilkinson Farm Park visioning was something that you had previously talked about putting in 2022. There's not much more here, but I highlighted again the things that I actually already have public or administration behind it. Cushman Trail etiquette signage, public access to the shoreline at Old Ferry Landing, do a feasibility study. You had previously, and this is something to think about, items that are not in the city's administration plans for this year, to revisit the master plan at Veterans Park. I'm not saying you commissioners, the 5 of you, chose that, but it did make a previous draft. And to look at the old Burnham properties, which are outside the city, up close to Purdy, and what could we be doing there. So I would like to tell you that it's ambitious, and I think that's good, to shake it down with some kind of schedule element. A lot of these things won't happen in 2022, or just won't happen on a monthly BD basis. Your committee, your commission could always have subcommittees. I'm not asking you to get more involved. I just want you to know that it's your ambition to put into your work plan what you think is the right amount of feasible things to track and to pursue. I will advise as best I can.
What is, sorry, go ahead, Will.
Oh, I was just going to ask a quick question that kind of aligns with the Parks Appreciation Day. Was there a discussion on like an Adopt a Park program, and was there some investigation that needed to go into that to determine whether it was going to conflict with union, with staff's duties, that sort of thing? And if you know anything about it, is that a possibility, or?
Ben or Terry might be able to help
Or
better
is-
than I myself.
Or is this a topic for a different time?
I've heard grapevine that hopefully some of those issues might resolve themselves as time heals. But yeah, I haven't heard positively one way or the other, to be honest with you.
right.
That was what I heard, is that it was a union issue, and, kind of Matthew and I kind of discussed, why Parks Appreciation Day was okay and why there was an issue with Adopt a Parks. It was because it was a singular day versus an open-ended program. So that
Well, maybe we can just get some follow-up on that. I don't know, Matthew, if that's something you can just kind of let us know if a decision was made, or if there's, an analysis on that, because I'd be very, very interested in an Adopt a Park program if that's possible.
Okay. Will, if it's okay, I've opened up that form, that sheet we were on before, and I'll call it an inquiry. That you guys are interested in an inquiry into Adopt a Park.
Yeah, something
well,
along those lines.
Yeah, and let's figure it out broadly. That a traditional Adopt a Park program where a set of businesses have adopted a park and they're doing a set of tasks every month. If that's not allowed for whatever reason, what is allowed? How can community members engage with the park that they care about?
Right.
Great question.
What are
Thank-
all the possibilities?
I love it.
Nailed it, Louise.
Good job. I'm going to call that an outcome. The outcome being opportunities that are allowed for citizens. Super. Well, I think we've covered a good amount. I don't want to get ahead of the commission, but I appreciate already the time.
Yeah, I think you're straight on. I think it's been chunky.
It hasn't been,
Um,
Ben, I don't know if you pause for a second and we can all decide, what parts of the agenda you might amend, but also to ask if Lynn or any guest, Lynn's been sitting with us, have anything they'd like to report ahead of any more work. Sometimes they stick around for a report at the very end and it's like, oh, they didn't have to do that.
right. Yeah, actually,
Public
if the
comment.
commission's all right with that, I would like to propose that we do shuffle the agenda a little bit to give our guests an opportunity. If
Good
all in
idea.
favor, all right, seconded, and all in favor of pushing the Arts Commission report and public comment above new business item number 1. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Lynn, would you like to go ahead and jump in, or do you want to? Yeah, if you have anything to report, I know that was quite the lengthy conversation, so thank you for sticking by us.
It's really fascinating actually to just observe your developing your framework here. It's really interesting. And it's hilarious because when I saw the agenda, I was like, oh good, this looks like it's going to be a pretty quick meeting, I guess. I don't know why I thought that.
We don't do that around here.
No, never.
Apparently not. Even when I saw the minutes from the last meeting, I was like, how many pages is this? Whoa, like I'm very impressed. And actually, I don't have a lot to contribute at all. The Arts Commission is completely embroiled in our Creative Endeavor Grants program, and we're hopefully getting some applications. And we'll be reviewing and awarding grants at our next meeting, which is the 9th. So, and other than that, we're kind of in our ongoing search for the next site for the Arbor Art, project. So be on the lookout for some snags in parks near you. Oh, also I heard that Anastasia is not with the Parks Commission anymore. So we don't have the reverse liaison for the arts. So I didn't wondering what we're going to do about that.
That is a great question. I have been thinking about that. And we are due for new members joining the Parks Commission, hopefully within the next month by our next meeting. And so I know my term's up and I already applied, and we should be getting 2 new Parks Commissioners. So I think we're going to appoint that role once we get a few more commissioners on board. But back to the Creative Endeavors Grant. Is that something that the Arts Commission decides on who is issued those funds? And then is there a public comment allowed at that meeting?
Ooh, it is a public meeting, so I'd say yes. I honestly don't recall ever having other, outside citizens commenting. I'm assuming that is allowed. Right? We'll be reviewing these the applications during our public meeting on the 9th.
And then deliberating on them in the same meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
We expect it might be a long meeting, but that's an interesting question. If you show up and you're allowed to provide comments. Yeah.
All right. I might join you. You said it's on the 9th?
Yes.
Okay.
10 a.m.
And Ben, if I might just speak up for a second here while Lynn's present.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Forgive me if this feels like a little bit of business, but I wanted to appreciate Lynn being present and say hello. And then it is kind of tied into the whole conversation of what do we share in our roles and figuring out even your work programs. This is a small example. I just wanted to bring it up because I was gonna bring it up in the parks report. There was damage done to the wood carving at Crescent Creek. You guys probably know there was a cedar tree there that got commissioned into a sculpture.
Oh,
What happened?
Vandals.
oh God, no.
Yeah, a small piece of it broke, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly where that piece is and what to do about it.
Huh.
I wanted you to hear about that. I also wanted you to hear that coincidentally, we are charged with updating the signage that was there. It was dilapidated, falling apart, and there was actually a complaint too about some of the wording on it. It referred to it being a totem.
Oh,
That's all just background stuff, but I guess I want you to know that the Arts Commission and the Parks Commission, to me, are wonderful places to vet what to do, how to handle a community situation. In this case, it's a piece of art. So we're going to try to build an understanding of how we work with the Arts Commission on documenting art and writing it up. I will say that I would like the latitude, I'm a single staff person. I would like the latitude of being able to say, you are some experts on the Arts Commission. Terry and I have the old sign, but we'd like to see it formatted in a nice, presentable way. And that's something maybe art commissioners could do. So I bring to your attention, like, that things need vetting, that things need public airing and coordination, and the Parks and Arts Commission both ideally do that. Now, an asset question about what to do about a broken piece of artwork. I'm not sure if we're going to get into that technical level, but it is nice to know that we probably have artists who have some experiences and protocols in mind, and including on how you sign and what you put in front of the sign. So that's an ongoing issue and something I wanted the commissioners to hear about because it's an active situation. But Lynn, to you and to your committee, please let them know.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. So it was obvious vandalism. It wasn't an aging component that just cracked off of there, huh? Wow.
Matthew, I can recommend a couple conservators if it gets to that point too.
Thank you. And Terry, did you have any more information or background on this? Was that no?
No, that's all I know. And we have the sign and we have the language that's on it to work towards a new sign. But as far as the artwork and condition itself, I haven't heard anything more.
And, Terry was like, Matthew, maybe you could work on the sign format. And I said, actually, there are better people at that. And people with some experience with presenting art. Yeah. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Yeah. We wouldn't be able to necessarily discuss it at our next meeting, but we should get that on the agenda as soon as possible. But then we're talking about April. So however you want to handle that,
Thank you.
If we need to talk about it at the beginning of our next meeting, just to bring it up and get the conversation started.
I think it's a conversation piece, and that's why I brought it up. And I think it might be that we talk about developing sign programs together, especially related to art. A totally separate subject, but I'll just bring it up because it's in my report or I don't want to forget. Ansich Park doesn't have a lot of signs right now, and we're anticipating a lot of different users and questions about where you moor and where you don't moor and where you unload. And there was even a request that a historic family name get presented in the park, and like it's been done in other parks. So the Jerkovich dock, for example, that it get acknowledged that. So there's signage and ways of presenting that I would say need branding and maybe even some input beyond Parks Commission and the limited staff here.
Matthew, do you mind if we stop screen sharing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody's back.
All right, there you all are. Okay, thanks for joining us, Lynn. That's a bummer to hear about the artwork big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I look forward to seeing you on March 9th. If anybody else would like to join, I think I will try and sit in on your meeting that day.
Great. Yeah, it's really, those are fun meetings to participate in, the grant discussions. Yeah.
Cool. I look forward to it.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
I'll probably stick around for a little bit.
Yeah, feel free. And then I didn't see any public comment. Terry, did you have any public comment submitted, written?
We had nothing submitted, but we do have one person attending from the public that would like to give comment.
Sure. Larry, it looks like you got your hand up. Terry will promote you. You're gonna promote a panelist? There you go. Perfect. All right, Larry, if you just want to go ahead and state your name and address for the record, and then we'll give you about 3 minutes if that's all right.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. My name is Larry Levine, and I reside at 243 South 55th Street in Tacoma. And I am the executive director of Forever Green Trails, a Pierce County-wide trail advocacy nonprofit organization. And I have our role is to assist the local jurisdictions with build out of our regional trails network. And I've been in touch with Matthew a little bit and wanted to show my face or bring my voice to the committee and say hi and introduce myself and let you know who we are and what we do. We have an innovative program that we're launching this year called the Trail Accelerator program. You might be familiar with or may become familiar with as you talk more about your RCO strategies, about the competitive grant programs there and how challenging that can be, because those are statewide competitions for limited funds. And we've developed a program, a public-private partnership that we can run for jurisdictions that helps to improve your scores in these competitive grant programs, making it more likely that you will receive grant awards. We do a whole lot more, and I welcome you to invite you to look at our website. It's just forevergreentrails.org. Trails has an S on the end because, more than one trail. I am happy to answer any questions that you might have now, but I would sure love to come back to a future meeting that's less jam-packed and give you a presentation about especially the Trail Accelerator program, because that's one of the most relevant things. And it's not just about building trails, as Matt and I had a discussion about recently. It might be a relevant financial partnership for even the trail project that he mentioned on the Cushman Trail. So I'll just end my comments there out of respect for y'all and your time. If you have any questions, let me know.
Great, Larry. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for being patient today as we worked our way through our agenda. I know it's kind of a thicker one, but appreciate you sticking around and giving us your voice, and hopefully we will have you back for a future presentation. Actually, that does sound something intriguing, I think, to a lot of the commission members, and something we've been discussing of recent in the Cushman Trail development. So appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, feel free to reach out at any time. My phone number and email is on every single page of the website. If you have any questions at all, that's what we are here for you. Thanks.
Sounds great. All right. Moving back to new business item number 1, the RCO funding assessment and strategy. Matthew, mind if I hand this one off to you? You had a pretty good background and grasp on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, and at the commission's pleasure, we'll decide on how much to get into this, but some of you do have background with RCO. It is the Recreation Conservation Office at the state of Washington, and it was just referenced by the previous caller. It is they offer grants, and they offer them in a 2-year grant cycle. Ben and I recently were able to attend, I don't know if others were able to, but attended their webinar. And I grabbed a few slides that I thought were valuable. I could pop those up on the screen. But really the essence of having this on your agenda is to not have a staff person working in behind the screen and not apparent to the public, like what are our priorities when we look at applying for grants. Again, I could give you a little more overview on RCO grants and tell you the ones that we have already. It kind of depends on how much you want to get into that tonight. You want me to try to be quick?
Sure. Give it a whirl.
Okay, I'll
Here's
try.
what you got.
These are not, these beautiful slides are not mine. They're coming up. They are from the RCO. Hopefully you're able to see that. Broad categories of funding opportunities. Is that showing for everyone?
Yes.
RCO has money for parks, trails, natural areas, water access, and boating. Turns out they offer a lot of different grant programs. It's too hard to read this slide, but these little individual green boxes are different grant programs. But what I liked about this slide was that it does show you how the funding is the source. And then there's a program that has multiple elements underneath it, and then different elements or grants underneath it. So really the grants are these small, slender green boxes and red boxes here. The other things are either programs here, a section of a program, and then on the top, of course, it's saying, don't forget, sometimes these funds like boating infrastructure grant funds, they're coming from federal programs. And federal programs are welcome, but they do come with more strings and often more expense. You have to do some more provisions, including fair labor and other things, just a little bit more stringent, but also restriction on the property itself. So you can't read all of this right now. I can just point out that under federal funding, there is something called Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's an active grant that we've used before. And I do have that list of grants that we have, even current one. We have a Land and Water current grant program. And that was an award for the YMCA, phase 1. Sometimes you can take a little bit of federal funding and match it against a state program. So they don't really show that on this graphic, but what you do with strategy-wise, and that's why I say I don't want to do this by myself, is you try to say, does the project apply for a LEA? That has to do with aquatic lands. Is it something on the waterfront? Is it tideland that maybe is worthy of, like if we wanted to do something, and I'm not suggesting this, at Austin Park, you could do something about federalizing it more with land and water funds, which would give you development funds, and a LEA would give you a little bit of funding on aquatic land preservation. So you can say, I have a project with multiple outcomes, back to that word, and those outcomes seem to fit the eligibility of different grants. So I'm just trying to let you know, like 17 different options. You got to shop around and be kind of strategic about your projects and where to apply the funds and if you're going to match funds. This is not really a necessary slide, but just more detail on land and water conservation. It's pointing out that the National Park Service is the source versus the Washington legislature for the RCO grants. Hope that is obvious. We have grants that are due May 3rd, and you can see that those are in 6 categories. So I would like to look before much more time gets by if we're actually going to apply for any of those 6 categories. Land and water comes to mind, right? And there is a large category I'm looking for, WWRP. The first slide showed that as a program. It's a big program. So really, this is the big one. This is the one that the state has habitat funds for, trail funds for, a number of subcategories. And you, like I said, we have a current WWRP grant. We also have a current Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. Both of those are matching each other and they're used up at YMCA. But I was talking about Austin Park as an example. Aquatic lands, you could apply for that, and you could apply for Washington Wildlife Recreation programs for habitat protection or for park development. Later in the year, there's some more grants that come forward, and it's just important that people know about them. RTP is Recreational Trails Program. That is one that I think the Cushman Trail Connector Trail is very well positioned to be applied for, because as you saw it come up even in Robin's presentation, there has been some effort to acquire the property and to start planning a trail across the street from Donkey Creek. Some of you know that property well, but Lyons property, 11 acres. If that were to happen and we were to put a trail connector to the waterfront from the Cushman Trail, well, that'd be fulfilling a big goal of the PROS plan and the non-motorized trail plan and so forth. And if we were to do that, you might be able to get the funding in 2023 when these dollars become available and get to the point of doing your design work and even development work through Recreation Trails program. So I want you to know, you don't have to be a grant expert, and I'm not one, but I want you to see what we're trying to do when we look at the projects in the PROS plan and we look at what grants apply and when. I was just bringing up that this current round brings funding in July of 2023. It gives you about 2 to 3 years to complete the project. So if you wanted to get involved, and Ben, you could ask if there was a subcommittee that wants to get involved. I'm not suggesting do that, but you could. We can go over the PROS plans together and the 6-year goals, and we can start looking. And I can also just be transparent with that material and try to keep you guys updated even between meetings, because May 3rd deadline is coming quick. There is a future, let's see if I don't think I have the slide here. Just to note that what'll happen is there will be a technical review of these applications in June. And at that time, we actually put together a presentation, and oftentimes park commissioners either attend or support those presentations. So if we apply for grants, it's kind of look to parks commissioners to accompany staff or a consultant. Larry was on the phone earlier. I bet he has made those presentations before. And commissioners help represent the community when it comes to getting RCO funds. So we would decide by May what to apply for, or actually decide ahead of that. May is when the applications are due. June would be a technical review with a practice of the presentation, or July. And then a formal presentation is done in August. They're usually 20 minutes long, timed, and kind of the thing of a nightmare for me. So I always want help from people so that I'm not just blabbering on for 20 minutes, which I tend to do too much. So PROS plan, that's the slides I was going to show. And then I keep mentioning you might be interested in seeing our RCO grants, and Terry can tell me if I'm missing some, but I had the 2 that I was aware of and I was bringing up. Maybe I'll make this bigger for you. The list of open RCO grants. So there are 2 of them. I've mentioned them several times, although I may have mischaracterized a little bit. One is called the Youth Athletic Fields. The other is the LWCF. I think I said earlier, it's WWRP, and I will correct myself because I don't think Youth Athletic Fields is part of WWRP. I'm not so sure. Past grants, Terry helped find these for us, 7 of them. You can see that the most active of closed RCO grants was on Ansich Park. We used the Aquatic Lands Enhancement account. You can see these other categories back to showing WWRP. Boating facilities were used at Jurassic Dock. That's an interesting one because Terry showed me these maps, which I don't think we have time to look at, but she showed me down at Jurassic Park that there's actually 2 phases of that dock, Jurassic Dock. So part of it is under RCO funding and restriction. Here she wrote this: the Jurassic Dock grant applies to the initial dock construction, the first detail, but not to the extension done in 2012. Just to give you a flavor of how these grants work, they come with restrictions and they come with expectations, and that's a good thing because it makes staff and all of us accountable to the state funds, federal funds too.
Hey, Matthew, do these particular grants, and Terry probably knows too, do they have a requirement for public access for a certain number of years?
Yes, public access is fundamental to these things, and most of anything that would be exclusive of public access is usually not fundable or eligible. So an example is the Home Port project at Ansich, a very expensive capital project the city is looking at doing, but it doesn't have public access. And you really can't get around it. You don't get to play with these people and say, well, people can walk on it. That's not how the Home Port's going to be organized.
Right, but like the Heritage Capital Project Fund grants have a 13-year minimum public access requirement. And I didn't know if these are the RCOs, do those have a similar requirement?
No, theirs are in perpetuity.
Mm.
And when you lose parkland that they have funded, you have a process of usually having to document obviously why, but a conversion is usually required too,
Mhm.
meaning that you go in and try to replace what they purchased somewhere that's equivalent.
Oh, okay. It's kind of like a mitigation.
Yeah, it comes, like I said, with requirements.
Yeah.
So I'm Matthew. So you had mentioned the possibility of a subcommittee for helping, participate in the grant strategies, proposing grant strategies. Is there any interest from the commission on participating in that? I mean, Georgina, you come to mind. I think you'd be a great advocate. No, to be honest with you, like you have so much background and knowledge, and I mean, you do your
Georgina-
homework. Not to say that the
Georgina,
others don't.
they call that being voluntold.
Gosh, I wish I didn't do my homework.
Time to get your feet wet, Georgina.
I don't have a background in grants. It is something I have never done. So I'd have to give that some thought. That sounds
Okay.
like a lot of work if you've never done it.
Yeah, and Matthew, maybe you can help us kind of grasp what kind of of volunteer we're volunteering for. Like what do you see it as? Like an extra monthly meeting or an additional weekly meeting, or is that up to the subcommittee itself?
Yeah, definitely the latter answer. It's definitely up to the involvement level of interest. And if it's a formal subcommittee, I would say it would meet on its own at least once a month, but probably as needed, which means maybe when it comes to the May 3rd deadline, we do need to meet every week, the last 2 weeks of April. Like I would say it's a minimum of once a month if it's a formal subcommittee, so that it can actually have a acknowledged role. I can always bounce ideas off individuals and copy everyone. That works too. I don't think I gave you guys enough parameters to really gauge this. I can tell you that in my mind, the most we would apply for is 2 grants. I mentioned that we could be applying for local trails, but that's not necessarily due this cycle. We could apply for local trails under WWRP and May 3rd. But I think the recreational trail program was a good fit for the Cushman Trail extension to Harborview. The other grant that came to mind is the North Creek Conservation Project that you've been hearing about. You can acquire property in 2022, and you can say that you do a process called letter of retroactivity, meaning we intended to apply for this program. We just had the opportunity right now to acquire the property. That's not a hard thing for me to put together because we've already put together grant applications for the conservation area known as North Creek. And in particular, the PROS plan suggested that phase 2 was going to have a significant outfall of funding or spending of funding on 2022 and 2023. It has over $4.8 million. Could the city come up with all that money? I can't say, that's a council decision, but your PROS plan is suggesting that we're going to get out there and find $4.8 million for the conservation effort of just phase 2. That's a big pot of money. That's a lot of money. And I think it's an obvious one to apply for to WWRP habitat. So anybody with the North Creek experience and habitat preservation, that might pin your interest to say, hey, I think this application would be better if it included this. And I think your answer to this question, staff needs to lead answers and do homework for you. But if I write up answers to 10 questions, it's really good to have somebody or 2 people say, yeah, we're committed to making sure these are answered well, with community ID in mind. So I can see us applying for a habitat grant, potentially a trail grant. I will point out that we do not have any planning grants this cycle. Planning grants are when you just want to study something. So I would have suggested we could have studied the BMX pump track bike playground design. But if it's only planning, they won't fund it. You actually have to have already pretty much a plan in hand and a commitment to development this cycle.
Gotcha. Yeah, Will?
Yeah, I'd be interested in helping out with that. I'd like to better understand, I guess, Matthew, what exactly you're looking for, in terms of whether it's just assistance in writing, just reviewing what's being written. But definitely interested in the habitat grant and pursuing that. I've got quite a bit of experience with it, so I think I can be helpful.
Thank you.
Awesome. And Matthew, how does that work with our 5-member commission as of now? Are we looking for 2 members or 3 members for a subcommittee?
Yeah, I think you could assume, well, I guess you'd have to probably keep it to 2 because 3 is your problem and we really have to get work done in the next month and a half.
Right. So 2-member for now until our commission fills the empty slots. But I mean, at that point, you're having somebody jump in at midpoint.
Yeah, so maybe it's a subcommittee of 2.
Of 2 for this cycle, at least. Okay.
I hate to admit that I actually write a lot of grants.
Perfect. You might be off the hook.
I'm really familiar with all this stuff.
We will never forget this moment.
And I have way too many to write, but I would be happy to review if that's helpful.
It is helpful. Thank you.
It is helpful. Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
And you'll never be asked as a volunteer to go beyond your space of comfort. So.
Yeah. But I believe in what we're trying to accomplish. So I feel compelled to at least do what I can. Yeah.
And if we get to the point where we get a larger commission, I'd be happy to jump in as well. Or, if we want to enlarge it to a 3-person subcommittee, but I mean.
Ben, earlier you mentioned you thought, or somebody mentioned that they wanted all the meeting agenda items to be open to the public, and there is someone with their hand raised.
Larry Levine.
Hi
Is that
again.
still the same? I think he's.
Yeah, 2 things. One is the RTP, the Recreational Trails Program, is focused on backcountry trails. So if you're talking about trails, within your city, it's the WWRP Trails Program that you want to utilize. There are, it's hard to keep track. It's taken me a long time, and I keep having to check RCO's website. There are so many programs, so I just want to make sure you had that chunk of information. And also, we, of course, will always be happy to write letters of support and help get other letters of support for your trail grant applications. Always important to have. And I'm also happy to be another pair of eyes. If you want to, Matthew, if you want to like scoot over applications, say, what do you think about this? And, I'll happy to be another set of eyes. We are here for you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, that's kind of Larry to extend that he wasn't concealing this, but he is a membership driven group. So we would at some point need to compensate his time and his involvement, and members do pay to be part of that alliance.
So would we just talk offline, Matthew, about Stephanie, about what day works best and how frequently and that sort of thing? I have some opinions on that only because I work and I have to have a commute.
What?
Yeah, well, I'm sure everybody else does too, but I have a commute involved around that work as well. So
super. Yeah, we will. Thank you.
Great. Matthew, anything more on the grant, on the RCO or grant strategies beyond that? Or do you think that's a good start with the subcommittee? That is, okay. I left my agenda in another room, but I believe the next item up is Parks Appreciation Day. We're having it. It looked like a revised 2-site day event, Shaw Park, and the other one was
Friends.
Veterans Memorial Park. As far as a task list, I'm sure that's something that's still evolving. Whether that will be. So I know in past we've had site coordinators for each site, where a parks commissioner was the site coordinator for each individual park and helped, facilitate volunteers and make sure tasks are being completed and everybody's being safe and not using chainsaws and all that fun stuff. But beyond that, I think we're going to be collaborating with Penn Met Parks. Is that right, Matthew? Are they hosting the same day as us? And then I think I spoke with Nicole Jones-Vogel at Penn Met, and she's the one putting on the program this year for Penn Met Parks. And she had spoke to the possibility of going out into the community and asking for sponsorships from whether that be businesses or, large organizations like the Boy Scouts or churches and stuff like that. And trying to get volunteers or donate supplies or snacks or water donated. So beyond that, I don't know if you guys had anybody in mind beyond church groups, Boy Scouts, and like Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Target. I think she had mentioned Crumble is, a potential target for donations for snacks or something like that. Do you guys have anything else beyond that? I know Terry's, familiar with, asking for volunteers. The LDS Church in previous events have been a big participant.
So you're asking for volunteers or you're asking for donations?
Both.
Okay. I can't separate these things out. So
give us your time, give us your money.
Volunteers, I think we could probably get the word out too. Like all the local churches would probably step in and help out. Even getting it out to the chamber so that some of the business organizations that are out there that like to do coordinated community efforts, that could be a really good one for them. So putting it out to the chamber would be super.
Okay. And I know Luis had mentioned that the Gig Harbor Canoe and Kayak Club does their beach cleanup somewhere in that month as well. So, whether or not they want to help on an additional day or if that's the same day, I forget.
What is the day? Can you remind me?
It was April 9th, I think.
Mhm.
Okay.
At, is it 10 a.m.?
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention is that I know Downtown Waterfront Alliance is working with the city to do the Gigging Up the Harbor for, I think that's May 14th. And so I know we have park stuff, but a lot of these little areas that need some love are also kind of adjacent to parks. So I don't know if you want to do a walk around and prioritize what gets done when, but that's possible.
Okay. Thank you. And then as far as sites go and tasks go, I know Shaw Park needs drainage, but beyond that, what was in mind as far as a tasks list for that specific park?
I got a little bit of feedback on that, but Terry, you might be more equipped to explain that Ken has a list, includes bark for one. He wants to see a lot of bark spread.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him about specific tasks yet. He's been out this week, so we'll know more by the beginning of next week.
I think that Shaw is going to be problematic. Let's just put it that way. I understand about going in and cleaning stuff up. Often it's easily identified what you're going to clean up, especially in the spring when weeds start to grow and things. There are these grasses there that have gone dormant. So, but I don't know how the bark is going to work because it's muck. It's like mud. I don't know. There's an awful lot of moss that's growing in the lawn. I don't know if that just dies off naturally. There's also weed, like some of the.
You embrace the moss. You embrace the moss. Welcome to the Northwest, Georgina.
But then there's this more spiky grass that's coming up through the grass that might have come from the planting area. But I don't know. It's almost like you need an expert to take a look at that before the public gets involved in what they pull and what they don't. And, some of these things are dormant right now. I mean, I'm a gardener, but I would find that really challenging to know how to do that. I mean, I don't think putting a whole bunch of bark down is necessarily, I don't know, once they start working on the drainage, which hopefully they will do before the summer, because we still have a drainage problem in the summer with the irrigation. So I don't know if that, normally bark would help, but in this particular instance, I just think an expert needs to take a look at that. I don't know who that would be, but knowing what its history is, knowing, this is almost like it has very little topsoil, apparently, before you hit the hard pan. And then knowing the type of work that might be coming up, what would be a waste of time now and a waste of money, any expenditures that perhaps are not going to be, they might be all dug up again once they get into the drainage of it. So I don't know. I wouldn't have a clue.
Was there a specific reason that Shaw Park was chosen as a site? Was it?
Yeah, earlier I mentioned just casually Ken, and I shouldn't have done that. Ken Andrews is actually in charge of our maintenance operations across several areas, including all parks. And we deferred to him. And I know there was no intention to say anything differently, but I believe he made he knew which parks made sense given his experience with a 3 or 4 hour volunteer period. I think he's careful about what is a permanent versus meaningful way to get an outcome. I can't say why he chose Bark, but I can only say that that was the first thing he did. I can tell you that I'm very much deferring to him. And I appreciate that he has been at these events before. I liked the idea that he picked something that was geographically different from one another, not downtown, as the gigging up the harbor is coming and other efforts. But basically, even though there were requests from other people to do different parks, it was a decision I was ready to give to Ken.
Okay.
And Ken, I've made a list of questions for him, including like, where will people park? Because there is a gate, but it's private property. And can people come onto it with their car? Is that a good idea? Probably not. But those questions, Ken, I have faith in, is going to help us resolve.
So can I ask a quick clarifying question? Is Parks Appreciation Day usually dedicated to a single park, or is it multiple parks?
I think we've had upwards of 7 sites before.
Yeah, we've had between 5 and 7.
Okay.
Usually each parks commissioner would get assigned to a park, but this is a much scaled down this year.
Okay. So
And we do have staff there on the day of the work party. So
this is one park this year. Is that correct? 2. What's the second?
Veterans Memorial Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then Penn Met said they're doing just 2 parks as well. I think they were doing Narrows Park and Tubby's Dog Park. So they're closest to the Veterans Memorial Park proximity wise, but in case we were going to do that, because in previous years Penn Met's hosted, an afterwards barbecue or whatever like that. But I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but in case there's like an overflow of, some volunteers at one park, we've shifted them from park to park in previous years.
Okay.
Ben, it's maybe I don't mean to ever put Terry on the spot, but she's got the experience here, and she could give us maybe some updates on things that she's already handling and taking care of, just to give you the idea that it is organized. There's publicity and so forth.
well, yeah, I've just started looking at it. As far as promotion, we can produce some flyers if that would be helpful. We can make a Facebook event. There's a few ideas out there. We have our street banner. We're going to put that up for 2 weeks. It will get, less exposure this year just because of the location of it. We do have the individual park banners that we put out. What else? Since it's scaled down, it will be much simpler on our end. We have sign-in, for those of you that haven't been there, we have sign-in sheets at each park, so it documents the hours, the volunteers that are there. It's also our liability coverage. They're signing a waiver to do the volunteer work. What else? Ben, you've been involved in this for quite a few years now. He's kind of been our coordinator. And I guess that's my big question is, when we start putting the information out, are they going to be looking to Matthew for answers?
And I know what we started to do last time, I think before COVID shot it down, was I think we had a genius, sign up genius organized where we had all volunteers previously register for the event. Which
We were
kind of,
starting that for 2020, but then
Right.
that one got canceled. So we never ended up using that tool. We
Right.
could look into it if you think it would be helpful. Only having 2 parks, it's probably not as important, but.
I agree.
But it actually, Terry, just to let you know, it is a resource that I talked to Penn Met and us sharing a genius sign up genius. So
Yes.
we can definitely hopefully build some commitment, that way, as well as be available for on-site registration. But yeah, what Penn Met's talking about doing is using a QR code that that they could place on Facebook and they could place on signs and flyers. And I asked if we could share the same QR code, so people who would then go to the Sign Up Genius and see there's 4 different sites and not be competing with one another, just letting people pick the park that fits their needs and interest.
Yeah, that
Some
would be
people are
good.
dog park lovers, so you got to let them go.
I guess my biggest question for the commission is, if you're going to go out and help recruit groups, how are we going to coordinate that together? How many people they're committing to, where they're going to show up at. And that's, I guess, my biggest question right now.
Yeah, in previous years, it was just me literally going into businesses and handing them flyers and talking to them about the event and emailing them. I think Oceans 5 had a lot of interest in participating last time. Being so close to KLM, I think that would still be a big, interest of theirs. They're a large employer. But yeah, as far as, I'd be happy to go out. Maybe if somebody else wants to volunteer to hit up a few businesses or churches, and once flyers are produced, to go hand those out or sign or hang those up at the library, at the post office, and local businesses, bulletin boards, the museum. I remember dropping some off for Stephanie in previous years. Just doing the legwork.
And once we get the social media events set up, people sharing those is a big way to get the word out to each individual, whatever groups each of you belong to.
Yes, we will definitely appreciate all that general support, and make sure you have the materials and the knowledge to be able to share it to your existing links and so forth. I do appreciate that Ben just volunteered, and I wouldn't say you always need a subcommittee, but if there's a second person who can say, yeah, this is something I either can work on or I know I can be there, that would be a good thing for us to know, so we're not talking to 5 commissioners without knowing who's really getting involved.
I can help distribute and talk to people, and I've got lots of networks to use.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, I can help recruit people at Heron's Key, but I'm going to need to know more information about it, because I'm going to get these questions from them, I know.
Right. What are the tasks? As part of the.
Bring your boots, because
Right.
you're dealing with mud.
Yes.
So I don't know if maybe I could meet with Ken. Ken, is that his name? Ken Andrews?
Yes, Ken Andrews.
That'd be
And
okay.
Georgina, we really appreciate that, because we know to coordinate with Heron's Point, especially if parking becomes a question. Like, we don't want to assume anything on private property.
Well, the parking, would be a problem. All of the outdoor parking spaces at Heron's Key are assigned to residents. So,
Right.
And then you've got I haven't actually taken a look at the condition of that area that will be the entrance to the village and Harbour Hill, to see. You could park there if you get the developer's permission, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't know the condition of that with all the rains we've been having. And of course,
Mhm.
April is a little ways off. But I can take a look at what that condition is like. It has a lot of gravel, so it might be okay. But the park itself is, it's at a very difficult stage right now. It's sodden all year round, but I don't think the upside, where towards Heron's Key, towards Borgen, and where the benches are and the musical instruments, that whole area, I can really take a look at it again tomorrow. I haven't been out there for about a month. So
Georgina, I'm going to take you up on going with you to these sites, and we'll see about getting Ken involved too.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Thanks.
All right, good.
Carrie, so contact, Luis and I and coordinate with us and we'll help get flyers distributed and word spread and stuff like that. Is there anything else off the top of your head that you can think of that was kind of pressing or concerning?
I don't think so. We just need to, this is just kind of come up, so we need to formulate the task list with Ken. And
So
then we can get the information out and kind of go from there.
Did you want to point a contact or do you want to leave that as yourself or Matthew or?
I'm ready to be the contact for this.
Okay. Sounds good. So as far as recruiting, going to a church, give them your email then.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good.
And we will get that flyer designed and to even electronically. And if you want to pick up hard copies or have us mail, we'll get that going. I think given that we're a little bit of a lesser scale this year, we don't want to, what I understood is one thing, we didn't want to have too few people. So Ken was strategic in picking 2 sites. What I was about to say about that.
What if
Sorry,
you end up with
lost my train of
too
thought.
many people?
Yeah.
I mean, could be some pent up demand here to kind of get out and do something, now
Yeah,
that-
well, I think you're onto what I was going to start getting at was
Yeah.
I don't like to rely on social media. That can be exclusive. But I do think QR codes and the idea of using Facebook is going to do leaps and bounds. And I don't know, there may be really good places that you guys have in mind for flyers, but I think a flyer, at least with a QR code, is probably an answer these days.
And we can post them at the parks too.
Yeah, we've done that before too, huh? Okay.
Well, thank you
Sounds
for your
like
time
a
on
good
this and
plan.
all these items tonight, guys.
Yeah, we are at I think the latest meeting we've had in a while, but all right, moving along. Matthew, you want to breeze through your parks update report?
Yeah, I think what is important for me to share is that Ansich Park is not yet open, at least the community paddler space. It looked open and pictures got out and even a release, but it's not yet open. There is a delay while we're trying to get a water and electrical situation straightened out. That's actually a safety issue, so people really should not be thinking they can go down there. I'm not going to get into the details, but we will do an announcement that it's open and there will be a ribbon cutting. We're trying to decide if that'll happen on the 13th of March or the 26th. There is actually a little technical challenge too with one of the floats. So there is work that still needs to be done, and it's why the big crane is still there in front of Ansich. One of the floats is needing to be remediated, I guess you could say. It actually doesn't have the capacity it's supposed to have in terms of flotation. So Ansich, look for a ribbon cutting, look for an official opening, and you probably know that we took in plenty of applications for the storage racks so people could have their human-powered boats inside. We do not yet know if we're able to accommodate the number of applications we had. I wouldn't think we could, but the number was under 100. And I think that the design, it depends on how many are stand-up paddleboard boats versus how many are kayaks and so forth, canoes. But a lottery is anticipated, meaning no one had a guaranteed space there. They applied for a space, and we will be working through that with the public and making sure they understand that it's a 6-month rental, that there's no advantage to one group or another. It's by lottery. And it may be that we can accommodate most of the applications, but I can't give you that update quite yet.
Is there a plan for the non-lottery winners to be part of like the second lease or the second rental agreement?
So this is all written up, Ben, and I'm sorry if we didn't share it with the commission beforehand, but it is not any kind of guarantee. It is a flat lottery each time. So there's not an advantage to having been there. You don't get a consideration to stay. You also don't get a consideration for having applied before.
Okay.
This is something we're evaluating as we go, though, so I don't ever mean to sound like, no, we
Right.
won't do that. Honestly, I want to be open to your sensitivities and your points of view, and that's a valid thought. It just right now it's written differently.
Okay.
I'll tell you guys that we submitted the Conservation Futures grant to Pierce County. Conservation Futures has been a great grant source for us in the North Creek Conservation Area that we've been talking about a bit on and off tonight. I think you know that at this point, we're looking at 3 different phases of this, and that's over 40 acres. But the conservation grant that I applied for would be considered the 3rd installment of Conservation Futures funding if we were successful. It is directed at the Hobb property or the property just north of Donkey Creek, as Robin presented it tonight. So you know that's in. I'll likely have a presentation required to do in front of their board. If anyone is really keen to be involved, I just want you to know that that's something to anticipate in the next month. And I'm going to try to be really quick here. There is a document I would like to send to all of you about an inquiry about recycling program that kind of fits with something the city's already committing to doing, but I want you guys to see that document. I know you've seen it, Ben, but I'll just send that afterwards. So please look for a proposal regarding recycling initiative by a third-party nonprofit. And then I had a request from Brenda, our liaison, our council member, who asked us to let you know that the council's really committed this summer to having something called listening sessions. And they'd like to have a booth that people can come and talk to council members and commissioners who are interested. This would be during farmers markets and music series at Scansey Park. So there is a sign up genius for that too. And I will send that to you so you can see it and decide, oh, that does fit my interest. I would love to go to that concert and be in a booth. I signed up for a bunch because I love that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be there myself, and I'd be happy to have you guys join me. I think that's what I had to say. There's this discussion going on about plaques and when to make them and how big they should be and for whom and protocol. As soon as I have something to share, I'll get it to you. That's my promise, to get you stuff. Getting too late for anything else. I could call it all up, but you guys would be like, nah.
Council and commission reports. Okay, any questions for Matthew on his parks update report? If you do, make it brief. All right. And then we went through public comment. I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Ben, you wanted me to remind you that you had something you wanted to update them this month on from the YMCA. I don't know if you had any other things on your list of report, but you had asked us to check into what's going on with YMCA access.
Yes. So the swimming is back on. It was never off, apparently. I was just misinformed. I'm not misinformed. I was mistold. That person was misinformed. So the public is actually granted, is it quarterly, Matthew?
Yes, 4 passes a year.
4 free swim passes a year to the YMCA. So hopefully that helps alleviate some of these swimming issues in the community. But I believe you just go in there, show your ID, and as long as you're a city resident, you are allowed 4 free uses of the pool a year.
Is it just the pool? And I thought it was access to the Y, no?
Is it access to the Y?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. And that's from a previous donation the city gave to the YMCA during construction, or?
Yeah, we'll call it a development agreement that spelled out that there was public investment, so public benefit would come out of it.
Gotcha.
It will expire, but I don't think until 2030.
Yes.
If I remember right, Penn Met might have also had the same agreement. So if you're not in city limits, you would use your Penn Met residency, should say.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, Terry.
So is it anybody with any Gig Harbor address then, essentially?
Close.
Well, because anybody over the Purdy Bridge wouldn't be Penn Met though.
Yeah, Key Penn is, if you're in the Key Penn Parks District, then that's not, it's its own thing.
Gotcha. Okay. So I mean, on this side of the bridge and this side of the bridge, free use of the Y 4 times a year. And thank you for following up on that, Matthew. I appreciate that. And okay, move to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Way to go,
Have a
you
great night.
guys. I wish we had treats. I wish we had little something to celebrate with, but thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.